The heavy London mist of 1891 clung to Baker Street, as though it feared being left behind by the hour. Within the familiar sitting-room at 221B, I, Dr. John H. Watson, was bent over a stack of medical journals, when an unnatural hush settled over the city outside. At precisely 12 o'clock, I expected the clang of St. Mary's East End clock tower, a distant but dependable percussion that had punctuated many a sleepless night. Instead, there came nothing, only silence so dense I fancied I could hear the gas lamps hiss in surprise. Sherlock Holmes stretched languidly on the settee, eyes half closed in meditation, opened one keen grey orb. "The city has missed a heartbeat, Watson," he murmured. Before I could inquire, the door below thundered with an urgent knock. Mrs. Hudson's startled exclamation drifted up the stair, followed by booted steps. Inspector Tobias Gregson entered hat in hand, face ashen. "Holmes, we have a devil's riddle. A man lies dead beneath the East End clock. No wound, no struggle, and everyone nearby swears they heard." A whisper. Holmes sat bolt upright. "Describe it." Gregson swallowed. "They say the clock spoke a name, the victim's, then ceased its toll." Holmes's fingers steepled. "A machine that whispers prophecy. Intriguing." Within minutes we were rattling through gas-lit streets in a yard cab. Fog braided itself between wrought-iron railings. Our lanterns carved tunnels through it, like miners seeking daylight. When we arrived at St. Mary's, constables ringed the square. The great turret clock loomed above, its motionless hands locked at 12. The corpse of Leonard Pike, modest bookkeeper, lay upon cobbles slick with dew. No trauma, yet terror twisted his features. A man who had died believing the very air conspired against him. Holmes knelt, producing a magnifier. No frost about lips, no scent of almonds, dismissing cyanide. Pulse had ceased scarcely an hour. Note, Watson, he clutches not his chest, but his ears, as though trying to shut out a sound. Holmes's gaze swept upward to the gearhouse. "Gregson, has the mechanism been examined? Engineers await. Post them aside. Watson and I will ascend first." Up a spiral stair, thick with dust, we climbed. Inside the clock chamber, brass gears stood frozen, but something else drew our attention. A strip of vellum pinned to the pendulum. On it, inked in spidery script, "The second stroke claims another, unless the detective be deaf." "Watson," Holmes whispered, "the murderer converses in paradox, a silent stroke, and he addresses me directly." A chill coursed my spine. "Then you are his target." "Possibly, but more pressing, who is the second?" Holmes withdrew a pocket chronometer. 59 minutes remain until 1 o'clock. The villain has given us his timetable. From below, constables shouted. A witness had emerged. We descended to find a trembling charwoman, Mrs. Agnes Rourke, eyes wild. "I heard it," she cried. A voice like wind through a keyhole. "Leonard Pike," it said. Then a hush thick I near suffocated. Holmes questioned her rigorously, extracting no embellishment. The voice? Neither male nor female, merely close, though unseen. Could it have carried through hidden tubing? He frowned. "Gregson, secure every street, within 2 blocks. No one enters, no one leaves. The murderer may still lurk, eager to watch his second bell toll." A plan sprouted in his keen mind, and before the hour ended Holmes and I patrolled adjoining alleys. Yet the clock remained mute at 1. No whisper, no corpse. Relief washed over the yard men. But upon returning to Baker Street we discovered an envelope slid beneath our door. Inside lay another strip of vellum. The detective has heard, but not listened. The clock whispers still. Holmes exhaled a wisp of amusement. The game, my dear Watson, has begun. Chapter 2. The Man Who Sold Silence. 1008 words. Morning light found Holmes pacing, violin untouched, a sure sign of concentrated fury. I poured coffee, its aroma failing to dislodge his trance. At precisely 1, he began without preamble. The killer broke his pattern. Why announce a second stroke, then abstain? To unsettle you, I ventured, partly, but consider. Our presence atop the tower may have thwarted an intended mechanical display. The murderer may require solitude to perform his trick. A rap at the door interrupted. A sprightly American stepped in, moustache waxed to daggers. Name's Cornelius Vanderhoff, proprietor of Chrono Acoustics Limited out of New York. I read of your silent clock in the Times. Thought Mr. Holmes might appreciate my expertise. For a fee, naturally. Holmes's eyes gleamed. You investigate acoustical phenomena? Design 'em, sir. Our patent whisper conduit pipes boardroom speech 50 feet without raising the human voice. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. Mr. Vanderhoff, you may have walked into peril, but perhaps also profit. Come. Back at St. Mary's, Vanderhoff inspected the tower, tapping brass casings. He produced a slim earpiece, held it to the pendulum housing, and grinned. Hollow walls, friend. Someone's laced tubing, narrow as a stiletto, through the frame. Speak at one end, it'll spider through and emerge a ghostly whisper. Holmes uncovered a hairline seam behind a gargoyle's. More, the terminus. The tube snaked downward into the sewers. Gregson arrived with news. Another message, Holmes, delivered to the Times office. He handed it over. 2 hours past midnight, the clock shall cough, and silence shall reign forever. Cough! Vanderhoff chuckled uneasily. Holmes traced the sewer map at a nearby lamppost. The conduit leads not merely underground, but toward the river. The killer could broadcast from any manhole. We'll never search them all in time, Gregson groaned. Holmes's gaze darted to Vanderhoff. Unless we make the whisper, speak to us. Within the hour, Vanderhoff rigged a small diaphragm microphone inside the gargoyle. Wires trailed to a yard carriage where I manned a listening horn. The city ticked toward 2. Holmes, hat brim low, prowled the square. Gregson stationed constables at every exit. When the clock hands aligned, my horn vibrated with a rasping inhale, then a fitful cough. Vanderhoff mouthed amplify. I adjusted dials. A voice, distorted yet gleeful. Time scratches at the throat, detective. Can you hear it dying? Holmes's whistle blew. Constables flung open manhole covers, descending like ants. Minutes later a shout, "We've found a device!" I joined Holmes to view a gramophone horn bolted to tubing, triggered by clockwork. Yet no speaker. The murderer remained at large. Holmes pocketed a fragment of wax cylinder, stamped CVL, Pat APL. Vanderhoff paled. Someone stole my prototype. Not stole, purchased perhaps under alias, Holmes said. Your invention is the weapon. Now we need the hand that wields it. That night Holmes dispatched telegrams to New York, seeking Vanderhoff's client lists. Meanwhile, Pike's autopsy revealed a rare toxin, aconitine, delivered not orally, but by inhalation. A gaseous poison carried through the whisper, Holmes mused. Ingenious. The cough foretells a fatal breath. Our adversary had fused sound and death. London itself was his instrument. Chapter 3. A Letter from the Dead. 1006 words. Rain hammered the panes as we returned to Baker Street. Vanderhoff remained nervously twirling his hat. Holmes, this scandal could sink my company. Assist us, and reputations may yet survive, Holmes replied. Mrs. Hudson brought a damp parcel addressed to me, though the handwriting matched the murderer's earlier notes. Inside lay Leonard Pike's pocket diary, pages glued together. A card instructed, "Steam the seams, Doctor." Witness what whispers truly do. At Holmes's nod, I held the diary over a kettle. Vapour loosened adhesive, revealing a pressed primrose and an American railway ticket stub. Baltimore and Ohio, May 5th, 1881. Pike had never left England. Holmes's brows arched. Our bookkeeper led secret travels, or someone wished us to think so. He leafed further, stopping at a ciphered entry. Columns of numbers filled half a page. He handed it to me. "Frequency analysis, Watson." I laboured, tallying digits. The 5 appears most often, likely representing the letter E. A simple substitution. Within an hour, we decoded the line. "Oath kept. American midnight approaches. Debt will be paid with the last chime." Holmes paced. "American midnight. Eastern time is 5 hours behind ours. When it is dawn here, it is midnight in New York. Our killer spans oceans." A telegram arrived from Pinkerton Agency. Client Westfield purchased Whisper Conduit, June 6th. New York address follows. The name rang no bell, yet Holmes's face changed. "Watson, recall the Westfield Bank. Scandal of 81. 5 directors escaped charges when a junior clerk disappeared with incriminating ledgers. Drowned, they said." Good heavens, Pike was that clerk. Precisely. He resurfaced under new identity. Our murderer avenges Westfield's downfall, or perhaps protects it. Thunder cracked. Holmes turned to Vanderhoff. "Book us passage on the next steamer to New York. The clock's whisper crosses the Atlantic. We must follow its echo." Gregson protested jurisdiction, but Holmes waved him off. "The Yard can guard London's towers. We pursue the source." As we packed, another envelope slid beneath the door, as though the very fog were messenger. It contained a single primrose petal and words that chilled me deeper than rain. "The clock may travel, but its hands remain on your friend's throat." I met Holmes's eyes. "He threatens you." Holmes shook his head. "No, Watson, he threatens you." His tone was soft, but in it I heard the ticking of a relentless clock, one that neither ocean nor miles of cable could silence. Chapter 4. Steamship of Shadows. The RMS. Etruria heaved westward through April swells, her triple expansion engines pulsing like a mechanical heart. Sherlock Holmes, coat collar upturned against Atlantic spray, stared past gulls that trailed us halfway to the horizon. I joined him on the promenade, noting the faintest tremor in his usually steady hand, evidence, perhaps, of the killer's taunt that my own throat lay beneath the whispering clock's hands. "Your unease is unwarranted, Watson," he said, not looking away. "Our adversary banks on fear. I decline to pay the interest." "Nevertheless," I replied, "I prefer vigilance." I patted the pocket that held my service revolver, freshly cleaned. Below decks, Cornelius Vanderhoff had converted the smoking lounge into a laboratory. Coils of rubber tubing, a gramophone, and a brass diaphragm littered the billiard table. "Gents," he called as we entered, "I reconstructed that sewer device, without the poison, mind you. Take a listen." He whispered "Watson" into the horn. Seconds later, the same syllables hissed from a tube threaded through the captain's barometer across the room, soft as a phantom. "Ship's bulkheads carry sound like cathedral arches," Vanderhoff said. "If Westfield is on board, he could whisper from any cabin and strike in another." Holmes asked the purser for a passenger manifest. Among first-class travellers, his finger paused on Mr. and Mrs. Everett Primrose, a surname too coincidental to ignore. He memorized their cabin number. That evening, Captain Reed hosted a recital in the Grand Saloon. A string quartet's lullaby masked our reconnaissance. Holmes and I positioned ourselves by the starboard companionway. When Mr. Primrose emerged, I saw a tall, silver-haired gentleman with a scholar's stoop. His wife, pale and bird-boned, leaned upon his arm. Holmes murmured, "Observe his gait, naval, despite academic spectacles, and the faint tan line where a signet ring once rested. Retired officer, newly widowed perhaps, yet travelling with a wife? The inconsistencies multiply." We tailed them to A deck. Holmes tipped his hat. "Pardon the intrusion, Sherlock Holmes of London." Primrose's eyes flicked toward the name like a ship to a lighthouse. "Indeed? I've read your exploits. Everett Primrose, Professor of Ancient Languages at Johns Hopkins. My wife, Clarissa." Mrs. Primrose's smile quivered, as if the muscles had forgotten the choreography of joy. Holmes feigned small talk before excusing us. Once out of earshot, he said, "She wears kid gloves lined with lead shot, useful for muffling touch. And her pupils are pinpointed, opiate use or prolonged confinement." Before dawn, a foghorn bellowed. I met Holmes on deck. Vanderhoff burst up the ladder behind me, face ashen. "My prototype receiver's gone, snatched from my cabin." Holmes sprinted for the wireless shack. Inside, Marconi equipment crackled, with static. The operator lay unconscious, a bruise flowering at his temple. Beside him sat our brass receiver, wired into the ship's aerial. Holmes grabbed earphones. A faint rhythmic click issued, ... Morse code. He translated, aloud, "TIME, whisperticks." Then, "Strike at dawn, New York. Ready London Echo." The transmission ended. He straightened. "There are 2 conspirators, one in New York, one likely here, sending confirmation. We must isolate the telegraph list. Only officers and certain first-class passengers have access." Suspicion now coiled around the Primroses. Holmes, Vanderhoff, and I divided tasks. Vanderhoff would booby-trap the receiver with a concealable ink that marked any who handled it. I would keep watch on the wireless room. Holmes intended to inspect the Primrose's cabin. Near midnight he returned, lips thin. Their trunks are filled with antiquarian texts and surgical tubing, enough to weave a ship-wide whisper. Just then the soot-black whistle of the Etruria shrieked. An urgent bell clanged forward. We raced to the bow where sailors hauled. A man from the brine, Everett Primrose himself, hair slicked green, lungs rattling. His first words upon coughing seawater amazed us. "Protect Clarissa." With that, he succumbed to unconsciousness. Holmes knelt beside him. Our suspect becomes our victim, which leaves Mrs. Primrose, or whoever she truly is. We sprinted aft, but Clarissa's cabin stood empty, door ajar. Inside, Vanderhoff's ultraviolet lantern revealed speckles of his invisible ink across her gloves and sleeves. She had stolen the receiver. One window was open to the Atlantic night. Holmes's jaw tightened. She is not Clarissa, but an agent, and she intends to land in New York unseen. Prepare yourself, Watson. This voyage will finish in blood or brilliance. Chapter 5. Docks of Midnight. The Etruria docked at Pier 50 on the Hudson River under a bruised pre-dawn sky of April 19th, 1891, local. Police lanterns bobbed like fireflies along the pier. Holmes had radioed ahead, and the New York Metropolitan Police obliged with a cordon. Yet Mrs. Primrose was still missing. Detective Timothy O'Rourke, bowler hat tipped, greeted us. Pinkertons briefed me. A lady matching your description disembarked early on a harbour pilot launch, slipped into the West Side rail yards. Felice set off in a hansom, wheels clattering over cobblestones. Vanderhoff unfurled a city grid. If she's carrying the receiver, she needs altitude for broadcast. Railroad water towers, telegraph poles. Holmes's gaze fixed on the looming silhouette of the Stuyvesant clock tower, a newly erected iron giant adjacent to the rail depot. there is our whispering twin to St. Mary's. We arrived to find the tower shrouded by scaffolding. Workers drank coffee from tin cups, oblivious to its potential as an instrument of death. Holmes darted up the service ladder, Watson and Vanderhoff following. In the gearhouse, the great pendulum ticked. Affixed to its counterweight was a copper, canister-stamped CVL and daubed with primrose petals. Vanderhoff hissed my design, modified to release vapour on the downswing. Lord save us! Holmes produced wire cutters. Watson, steady the pendulum at the apex. Sweat stung my eyes as iron mass strained my shoulders. Holmes severed the fuse. No hiss of poison emerged. Footsteps clanged below. O'Rourke huffing. We collared a messenger outside. Telegram for you, Mr. Holmes. The note read, The hour hand is but a blade, the minute hand a needle. At 10 o'clock both pierced the heart of commerce. Holmes checked his watch. 9:12 a.m. The target is not here. This device was decoy. 10 o'clock, heart of commerce, Wall Street. The Whisperer plans mass murder in the financial district. We raced downtown. Skyscrapers rose like steel sequoias. At the corner of Broadway and Wall, the Trinity Church steeple clock towered above bankers. Holmes surveyed rooftops through field glasses. There, telegraph wires leading into that attic above the sub-treasury building. Inside, dust motes spiraled around crates labelled Westfield Bank Archives. Mrs. Primrose, stripped of her mourning veil, now wore a mechanic's jumpsuit. Gleaming brass tubing laced the rafters, terminating in a vent pointed at the street below. She brandished a revolver. Holmes raised his hands. Your employer failed to drown Everett Primrose. Surrender, and you may yet live. Her voice cold and clipped. I am Everett Primrose. The man on the Etruria was my twin brother Arthur, a gentle fool. He begged me to abandon vengeance. I silenced him. Watson whispered, Holmes, the gloves, lead-lined to handle aconitine, powder. Primrose laughed. Westfield stole from widows, ruined my family. Their directors fled justice. Now their successors will choke on profit. At 10, the tower exhales. Holmes edged toward the tubing. You repurpose Vanderhoff's conduit to disperse poison. Ingenious, but unnecessary loss of life. I calculate risk as they did, coldly. She cocked the revolver. A whistle shrieked outside, police forming perimeters. Primrose fired. The shot nicked Vanderhoff's shoulder. I returned fire, striking her wrist. The revolver clattered. Holmes lunged, tackling her, but she slammed a lever. The tubing rattled. A valve, opening. I dashed to the vent, stuffing my cloak inside, staunching flow. Vanderhoff, bleeding, yanked power leads free. The fan died. Holmes cuffed Primrose as officers stormed in. She spat. You saved thieves. Holmes's eyes were granite. Justice is not yours alone to meet. At 10:02, the city bells tolled harmlessly. The heart of commerce kept beating. Chapter 6. The Final Whisper. 2 days later, in a Manhattan courtroom, Clarissa Everett Primrose, real name Clara Westfield, stood accused of multiple counts of attempted murder. Newspapers hailed Holmes. Vanderbilt's lawyers sought his patent's safety. Yet one mystery lingered. Who had fed Clara the inside names and smuggled Vanderhoff's prototype to London? Holmes requested a meeting with senior Pinkerton agent Lydia Graves. She produced telegram copies. Among them, a ciphered note from C to Clara, dated March 1st. London clock ready. Deliver Pike's diary to Bate detective. Initial C matched neither Clara nor Vanderhoff. Perhaps a Westfield director, I asked. Holmes shook his head. They avoided written evidence in 1881. Why risk it now? Another player orchestrates the stage. A clerk entered with cable, records. One number repeated. Newport, Rhode Island estate of Senator Roderick Channing. Rail magnate, vocal opponent of bank regulation. Holmes's lips thinned. Our unseen conductor. We secured warrants and travelled by overnight train to Newport's gilded coastline. Channing's mansion, a marble confection called Timekeeper's Rest, overlooked a private cliffside clock, tower whose hands glittered gold. A butler stalled us until Channing descended, cigar glowing like a coal. Mr. Holmes, the Empire State welcomes curiosity, but trespass is regrettable. Holmes presented evidence, telegraph logs, Vanderhoff invoices, and Pike's diary showing payoffs signed R.C. Channing exhaled smoke. Business requires silence. Noise panics markets. Miss Westfield agreed. He gestured toward the sea where gulls wheeled. A clock's whisper is the perfect strike. Instill fear, shift shares, profit on the dip. Alas, she let sentiment cloud strategy. Holmes countered, "You funded murder." Channing shrugged. "Collateral, and now you possess inadmissible hearsay. Shall we parley?" At that instant, the mansion's grandfather clock chimed 11, but its tone warped into a whisper. "Holmes! Holmes!" Gas jets flickered. Servants screamed. Vanderhoff, inspecting the clock, ripped away panelling to reveal tubing and a wax cylinder. Holmes drew his revolver. "Even here you play with toys!" Channing's mask cracked. Rage flushed his cheeks. He lunged for a hidden switch beneath the mantel. I tackled him, but not before gears whirred in the seaside tower. A cannon-loud boom shook the cliffs. The tower's bell had been packed with dynamite. We dashed outside. Smoke billowed. Debris rained. Yet, amid ruin, the golden hands remained, impaled in the lawn like fallen spears. Holmes cuffed Channing with O'Rourke's help. Timekeeper's Rest, indeed. You stopped your own clock. Back in New York, Channing faced federal charges. Conspiracy, terrorism, securities fraud. Newspapers dubbed the affair the Whisper Panic of '91. On April 24th, we boarded the Etruria eastbound. Vanderhoff, arm in sling, offered Holmes a polished brass receiver. "Keep it for inspiration." Holmes smiled faintly. "No, my friend. Cast it to the depths." Vanderhoff obliged, and the device vanished beneath whitecaps. That night in our cabin, Holmes struck a match, lighting his pipe. "Watson, note the irony. A whisper nearly shattered empires, yet the spoken truth, your testimony, restored order, raised a glass. To clocks that ring aloud, not conspire." He nodded, and to friendship, the loudest ticking in the human heart. Outside the ship's bell chimed midnight, a sound we welcomed unafraid, for it spoke not prophecy, but passage home. Chapter 7. Echoes on the Atlantic. The RMS Etruria sliced eastward through slate-coloured seas, her wake a-foaming, ribbon back toward England. Though the whisper panic arrests filled headlines ashore, Sherlock Holmes knew justice, like sound, could dissipate if not maintained. In our cramped saloon cabin, he unfurled Florence Nightingale-style field notes, a sheer habit he claimed sharpened analysis, and reviewed unanswered riddles. "Watson, observe this timeline." He tapped 3 dates with his pen. March 1, Channing cables Clara. March 2, sewer device tested in London. March 4th, Pike murdered. Yet Vanderhoff shipped only one prototype to Channing on March 8th. He looked up. "A second receiver. Preceded it. Who built that?" "An accomplice in London," I guessed. "Precisely. Channing's reach explains finance and motive, but not the artisan who threaded tubing through St. Mary's unseen." Holmes lit his pipe. "We must identify the London mechanic. I fear unfinished business there." Our conversation paused as the ship rolled. A steward knocked, bearing a Marconigram. Primrose escaped from Newgate by disguising as matron, believed headed East End. Gregson. Holmes exhaled a plume of smoke. Everett Primrose, Arthur, the twin we presumed, drowned. Evidently alive, possibly bent on rescuing his sister or continuing her vendetta. The clock resumes its whisper. Vanderhoff entered, bruising fading. "Gentlemen, received notice. My London workshop was burgled. Blueprints missing." Holmes's eyes hardened. Then our mechanic may be rearming. That night, fog engulfed the deck. I awoke to creaking floorboards. A shadow loomed in the corridor. I followed, revolver drawn, but the figure vanished among lifeboats. Only a primrose petal remained, pinned to a davit with a sailor's knife. Holmes inspected the petal. Symbolic, but also a warning. Arthur Primrose stalks us, even at sea. He posted a guard on the wireless room and spent dawn transcribing code from the receiver's residual grooves. Playback revealed a male voice repeating, "Orion! Orion!" The name of a constellation, Holmes mused, but also a warehouse near Limehouse Docks, Orion Steamworks. Our mechanic's lair, perhaps. We landed in Liverpool 3 days later and took the night train to London. Holmes slept little, writing telegrams to Gregson, Lestrade, even Mycroft at the Foreign Office. One asked for naval manifests. Any vessel named Orion. Another sought wharf permits under aliases Primrose or Westfield. As dawn splintered over Paddington, Holmes closed his notebook. "Watson, brace yourself. The clock's final whisper will be the loudest." Chapter 8. The Orion Steamworks. Gregson met us in a hansom beside the murky Thames. "Newgate's disgrace," he spat. "Primrose disguised in matron's cloak, chloroformed a guard. 2 days lead on us." We approached the Orion Steamworks, an abandoned warehouse whose windows wept rust. The yard surrounded it, yet Holmes insisted on subtlety. He and I slipped past a side gate, stepping over coiled hemp and iron scrap. Inside, acetylene lamps flickered, illuminating a cathedral of machinery. Among boilers sat a half-assembled brass behemoth. Twin horns, clock gears, and bellows. Vanderhoff inhaled sharply. An omnidirectional whisper conduit. Amplifies across miles. From a mezzanine, a voice echoed, "Step no further, Mr. Holmes." Arthur Primrose emerged, pale but resolute, revolver in hand. Behind him lurked a gaunt engineer in oil-stained coveralls, our London mechanic. Holmes addressed the latter. "Mr. Silas Rooke, formerly chief bell-hanger of Whitechapel Foundry until dismissed for sabotage. You found a new patron." Rooke sneered. "A craftsman deserves proper commission. Channing paid, Miss Primrose inspired." Holmes edged forward. "Arthur, your sister faces the gallows. Cease this madness." Arthur's eyes glistened. They made Clara a monster. Time must punish them. He gestured to a boiler where canisters of aconitine vapour hissed. "Tonight, all of London shall hear the clock cough." Holmes whispered to me, "He's wired the city's telegraph poles. This device will ram sound through every line." Gunfire erupted below. Gregson's men storming the main doors. Rooke toppled a lever. Gears groaned to life. The brass mouths vibrated, emitting a low drone that rattled my teeth. Holmes sprinted up iron stairs toward the boiler's cut-off. I followed, trading shots with Rooke. Sparks flew as lead struck metal. Vanderhoff scrambled to the main flywheel, jamming it with a crowbar. The pitch faltered. Arthur aimed at Holmes, but I tackled him. The revolver discharged, shattering a lamp. Flames licked grease-soaked timbers. Smoke billowed, mixing with toxic vapour. Holmes shouted, "Watson, the release valve! I wrenched it open, steam blasted, diluting poison." Vanderhoff's crowbar snapped. The machine lurched, gears stripping teeth. With a final screech, the horn split, collapsing in a tangle of bronze. Fire crews burst in, dousing flames. Rook fled through rafters, but collided with Gregson's truncheon. Arthur Primrose knelt amid ruins, sobbing, "Clara, forgive me." Holmes surveyed the wreckage. London is spared, but the whisper will echo in courts for years. Outside, rain cleansed the docks. Holmes turned to Vanderhoff. "Your invention nearly became a weapon of mass terror. Will you dismantle it?" Vanderhoff nodded. "I'll patenteer trumpets, nothing more." Holmes smiled thinly. "A safer market, surely." Chapter 9. Time Unwound. Weeks later, the Old Bailey buzzed as Clara Westfield, Arthur Primrose, Silas Rook, and Roderick Channing faced a joint trial dubbed the Clock Conspiracy. Holmes testified first, methodically unfurling evidence. The courtroom hung on every cog and whisper. During recess, I found him in the gallery, eyes distant. "Something troubles you still," I said. "Indeed, Watson. The conspiracy's architecture fits, but one cornerstone is missing. Why Pike? Clara claimed he ruined her family, yet Pike's diary suggests he tried to expose Westfield's fraud. Murdering an ally contradicts vengeance. We sought Pike's landlord, Mr. Hobbs, who produced a locked strongbox left in arrears. Inside lay ledgers, Westfield stock certificates, and a sealed letter addressed to E. Primrose. Holmes slit it open. "Dear Everett, you asked me to safeguard proof of Channing's crimes until trial. I fear the clock's whisper stalks me. I perish. Deliver these to Holmes. He alone can expose them." Leonard Pike Holmes inhaled sharply. Arthur intended to protect Pike, but Clara intercepted the letter, fearing leniency would spare Channing. She poisoned Pike to fabricate prophecy and lure me. Back at court, Holmes confronted Clara with the letter. Her composure cracked. Pike hesitated, she admitted. He would have bargained. Vengeance demands certainty. Arthur's face fell. Tears welled. "You killed the one man who believed us." The jury deliberated 2 days. Verdict: Channing, guilty on all counts, sentenced to life. Clara, guilty of murder, condemned to death. Arthur, accessory, 10 years hard labour. Rook, 20 years. On the eve of Clara's execution, Holmes received her request for confession. We visited Newgate. In the dim cell, she handed Holmes a tiny brass cog. "From the clock that killed Pike," she whispered. "Keep it, so you never forget time's cost." Outside, dawn tinged the sky. Holmes pocketed the cog. "Watson, justice prevailed, yet satisfaction eludes me." I replied, "Because justice cannot resuscitate the dead." Months later, at Baker Street, a box arrived from Vanderhoff. A mantel clock fashioned from neutralized whisper conduit tubing, its chime pure and bright. The enclosed note read, "May time speak only of peace." Holmes placed it on the hearth. When it struck 12, no whisper followed, only a clear bell, ringing for those who could still hear hope. Chapter 10. The Cog That Wouldn't Talk. Summer settled over London like a warm, damp quilt, yet Baker Street remained a hive of unresolved energy. The brass cog Clara Westfield had given Holmes lay upon his desk, illuminated by a shaft of sunlight that pierced the smog. For 3 weeks he had studied it with magnifiers and chemical reagents, grumbling each night that it refused to yield its final secret. "I fear you chase ghosts," I remarked as I filed patient notes. Holmes lifted the cog with tweezers. Ghosts have mass, Watson, if one knows how to weigh them. Note the faint etching along the rim. Microscopic runes, no doubt engraved by Silas Rook's fine lathe. Rook languishes at Pentonville, I reminded him. Indeed, but his craftsmanship endures. He placed the cog atop blotting paper dusted with graphite. When he tapped it, black particles adhered, revealing recessed lines that formed a minuscule coordinate grid. Latitude and longitude, Holmes whispered, comparing numbers to a naval chart. A location off the Kent coast, Goodwin Sands. Frowned. A notorious ship graveyard. What lies there? An answer Clara wanted me to find only after her death. He rose. Pack a sea trunk, Watson. We depart at once. 2 days later, we hired a stout fishing smack out of Deal. Its skipper, old Ben Tiller, eyed us sceptically as we ventured into choppy grey waters. At the coordinates, a bell buoy tolled mournfully. Holmes scanned waves with binoculars until his gaze fixed on a tangle of wreckage protruding at low tide. A shattered steam launch whose iron nameplate read Orion. The first whisper conduit field test, he surmised. Clambering aboard, we found a corroded safe wedged under splintered decking. Using a pry bar, Holmes popped it open to reveal parchment ledgers, Westfield Bank's original fraud records, and a daguerreotype of Pike, Arthur, and Clara smiling on a Baltimore pier. Holmes pocketed the evidence. Pike hid the proof where fraud first began, aboard Channing's illicit cargo vessel. Clara intended the world to uncover it posthumously. A distant horn blared. We turned to see a sleek black cutter bearing down, no flag flying, men armed. With rifles manned her bow. Holmes hissed, "Channing's remnant, come to erase loose ends." Shots cracked splintering wood. We ducked below the gunwale. Old Ben gunned his motor, circling to pick us up, but the cutter manoeuvred to cut him off. Holmes struck a match, set oily rag to the wreck, and shoved the safe into the sea. Flames licked tarred planks, sending smoke skyward. Evidence mustn't fall into their hands. We dove overboard as fire engulfed the launch. Old Ben hauled us aboard his smack, racing for Deal. The cutter pursued but veered away as Royal Navy patrol horns sounded from the haze. Holmes had prearranged their presence via Mycroft. On shore, soaked and shivering, we watched the Orion's corpse burn to the waterline. Holmes exhaled. "The cog has tocked, Watson. Now the whispers truly end." Chapter 11. Mycroft's Gambit. Back in London, my convalescence was brief. Holmes summoned me to Pall Mall, where Mycroft occupied, a cavernous Diogenes Club reading room. Upon a silver platter rested Pike's sodden ledgers, fished from the safe by Navy divers. "These documents," Mycroft intoned, "implicate members of Parliament who backed Channing. Their exposure could trigger economic upheaval." Holmes replied, "Justice outweighs convenience." Mycroft slid a sealed envelope across the table. "Perhaps the ledger's power can be wielded without public ruin. The government proposes selective prosecution." Holmes's eyes hardened. "Blackmail in service of stability." "Pragmatism," Mycroft corrected. Outside in the street, Holmes paced furiously. "My brother binds whispers with bureaucratic twine. Yet if we defy him, the innocent may suffer collapse." That night in Baker Street, Holmes examined ledger entries, highlighting laundered sums funneled through shell companies. He paused at one name, Edmund Faraday, a philanthropist funding East End hospitals. "Not all beneficiaries were villains," he noted. I asked, "So how do we sever the rotten branches without felling the tree?" Holmes's answer was to vanish for 48 hours. He returned haggard but satisfied, handing me a pamphlet. "The Whisper Dossier," an anonymous exposé serialized for the Pall Mall Gazette. It detailed Channing's scheme, yet obscured minor investors through coded initials. Mycroft gains leverage. Public gains truth. The market keeps its footing, he said. When the Gazette hit newsstands, Parliament convulsed. Arrests followed for key conspirators, while lesser names quietly resigned. Faraday donated double his prior charity to avoid further scrutiny. Mycroft sent a terse note. Your compromise accepted, though your methods irk me. Holmes only smiled, yet one morning the Gazette office exploded in a firebomb that killed 2 editors. A note at the scene read, Time silences liars. Holmes crushed the paper. The clock ticks again. Chapter 12. The Pendulum Strikes. Inspector Lestrade traced the bomb materials to a Limehouse pawnshop, where a witness described the buyer. Gaunt, oil-stained coat. Silas Rook's brother, Gideon. Holmes deduced Gideon sought vengeance for Silas's 20-year sentence. For 2 nights we staked out landmarks tied to Rook's past. On the 3rd, Big Ben's bells halted mid-peal, replaced by a low mechanical growl. Crowds gasped as Westminster bridge lamps flickered. Holmes's face went icy. Gideon has commandeered the mother of all clocks. We raced to the Elizabeth Tower. Inside, gears larger than railway wheels clanged out of sync. Gideon Rook stood atop the maintenance gantry, connecting pipes to the great bell. A caged canister of explosives swung like a sinister pendulum. Timed to shatter the bell at noon, Rook shouted over the din. You caged my brother in a cell! Now London will mourn its heartbeat. Holmes climbed the ladder. Your brother chose crime. You choose worse. I and Lestrade evacuated tourists below. The clock read 11:52. Holmes advanced along a narrow beam toward Rook, who brandished a spanner. Blow met parry. Metal rang. Below, I spied the pendulum's fuse burning. No chance to descend and cut it. I aimed my revolver, but feared striking Holmes. Holmes fainted, luring Rook beneath a maintenance hatch. With sudden force, he kicked a lever, dropping the hatch. Rook plunged onto a net of drive chains, entangled. Holmes slid down, slashed the fuse with his knife at 11:59:40. Sparks died inches from powder. Rook screamed curses as constables hauled him away. Big Ben's mechanism wheezed back to order. At noon the bell tolled true, its resonance unbroken. Outside reporters clamoured. Holmes spoke softly. Let the record show London's voice endures. That evening, Holmes returned the brass cog to the mantel clock Vanderhoff had crafted. He wound it once. The chime rang pure. Watson, he said, easing into his armchair, time's whisper is silent at last, but mark my words, there will always be those who try to bend ours to their will. When they do, we shall listen and answer with clarity. I raised my glass. To clocks that chime, not conspire, and to the detective who hears the unheard, the mantel clock ticked on, audible, honest, and alive, while the broader city settled into a peace hard won by the clash of gears and the sharpness of a mind unwilling to be silenced. Chapter 13. Reverberations in Baker Street. An autumn. Chills seeped through the brickwork of 221B, rattling window panes and nudging the mantel clock's pendulum into a faster rhythm. Sherlock Holmes stood by the hearth, pipe unlit, studying a pale ring where Clara Westfield's cog once rested. Though the whisper conduit plots had been foiled, London's undercurrent hummed with rumour. Financiers whispered of a second panic, and the Pall Mall Gazette ran serialized fiction that too closely mirrored reality for the comfort of certain powerful men. A telegram arrived from Inspector Gregson. Westfield sympathizers cited Whitechapel, exchanging documents marked T+M, recommend consultation. Holmes tapped the codebook he kept hidden beneath violin scores. T+M translated to tempus machina, time machine, an absurd phrase except in the secret argot of Clara's network, meaning detonator. "Fear our peace was provisional, Watson," he said. "Someone intends to weaponize the symbolism of time once more." The next morning, a gaunt figure in a threadbare coat climbed our stairs. He introduced himself as Mr. Edwin Crane, itinerant clock repairer, face etched by soot. He clutched a battered valise and confessed, "Sirs, I once apprenticed under Silas Rooke. A fortnight ago, men forced me to fabricate miniature escapements loaded with fulminate. They threatened my family." Holmes drew him out. The men's leader wore a pearl stickpin shaped like a minute hand, Clara's private emblem. Crane delivered 2 completed devices to a public house called the Gilded Dial, but stole a third, fearing mass casualties. He produced it, a pocket watch whose mainspring concealed explosive mercury. "Winds down, blows up," he said. Holmes praised the courage. "You shall stay at a safe house." We escorted Crane through a side exit, but on returning, found our sitting room ransacked. A message chalked upon the mirror read, "Time's up." Holmes's gaze hardened. They wanted the stolen watch, and to remind us the clock still whispers. Chapter 14. The Gilded Dial. That evening we infiltrated the Gilded Dial, a dim tavern near Spitalfields. Brass chronometers adorned every wall. Their ticking formed a sinister choir. Holmes, disguised as a dock labourer, spotted the pearl, stickpin, upon a man recounting tales to rapt patrons. His name, murmured by servers, was Jonas Wolfe, a radical pamphleteer. Holmes slid beside him at the bar. "Your brooch, fine craftsmanship. Where might I obtain its twin?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Earn it, as I did, by turning minutes into monuments." Outside, I shadowed Wolfe as he exited through an alley. Holmes intercepted, confronting him with the pocket watch bomb. Wolfe smirked. "You arrest me, City Burns. Let me pass. I'll guide you to the heart." Holmes wagered on duplicity, but agreed, following Wolfe to an abandoned printworks. There, crates of watches awaited distribution, each rigged to explode at predetermined times during Lord Mayor's show. Wolfe declared, "London will march to the rhythm of revolution." Suddenly, a slatted door crashed open. Gregson's squad, tipped off by Crane. Wolfe bolted up iron stairs. I pursued but slipped on grease, discharging my revolver. The shot shattered gas lamps. Flames whooshed across oily floors. Watches popped like infernal popcorn. Holmes dragged me clear as Gregson's men doused fire. Wolfe vanished through rooftop, gaps, but crates were destroyed. Holmes stared at the blaze. The city is spared, yet Wolfe remains free and spiteful. A scorched placard fluttered down. "Tempus machina will sound at the 11th hour." Holmes pocketed it grimly. Chapter 15. The 11th hour. Preparations for the Lord Mayor's show proceeded despite threats. Holmes, fearing another, Engel, examined parade blueprints. Wolfe need not smuggle bombs. The route itself is a clock face, he mused, mapping checkpoints as numerals. 11th hour corresponds to Ludgate Circus. On parade day, fog blended with confetti. Holmes stationed Gregson's units at Ludgate. At 10:45, a mounted guard's drum horse reared, its harness jingling anomalously. Holmes's keen ear detected a high-pitched whir, the wind-down of a timepiece. He and I dashed through the crowd, locating a ceremonial carriage housing a massive floral display. Buried within, we found Wolfe's magnum opus, a brass pendulum, rigged to strike a detonator when parade bells reached 11. Holmes worked agile fingers, freezing the escapement with an iodine spray meant for medical sterilization. 10:57. 10:58. Each tick hammered our nerves. Finally, he extracted the blasting cap. The crowd roared as the Lord Mayor approached, unaware. Wolfe, atop a nearby awning, shouted, "Time's tyranny ends now," and fired a pistol. Constables wrestled him, the shot going wide. Holmes climbed the carriage, displaying the inert bomb to cheers. At Scotland Yard, Wolfe faced Holmes. "You merely delay the inevitable. Others will wind the clock." Holmes responded, "Then we shall keep listening." That night, back at Baker Street, the mantel clock chimed 11, peacefully. Holmes exhaled, eyes on Clara's empty cog imprint. "Watson, revolutions echo louder than whispers, but both can be stilled by vigilant ears." I nodded, and by steady hands able to arrest a fatal tick. He smiled faintly. "Still, let us sleep with one ear open." The clock ticked on, its cadence no longer ominous, but eternal, a reminder that while time may be weaponized, it can also be guarded by those sworn to hear its every beat. Chapter 16. The Secrets Beneath Westminster. A cold wind swept through Westminster's shadows as we made our way toward the subterranean passages beneath the Houses of Parliament. The night had fallen thick with fog, making it impossible to see beyond a few feet ahead. Holmes, ever the vigilant observer, stepped carefully through the mist, his boots echoing off the cobblestones, as if the city itself was holding its breath. "Holmes, why do we continue down this path?" I asked, my voice cutting through the eerie silence. "We've already stopped the conspirators once. What more remains hidden?" Holmes turned, his eyes flashing with a familiar intensity. "Watson, in every conspiracy there is always one last secret, one final thread." Clara Westfield's cog did more than reveal the time bombs. It showed me a hidden pattern beneath the city itself, a pattern tied to Westminster's very foundations. But what can be buried under Westminster that hasn't already come to light? Holmes didn't answer immediately, but gestured toward the entrance to the subterranean vaults, concealed beneath the Palace of Westminster. The vaulted stone ceiling overhead seemed to close in as we descended deeper, the atmosphere growing damp and stifling with each step. After navigating a series of ancient stone corridors, Holmes paused at a hidden doorway that appeared to be part of a larger forgotten system of tunnels. A bronze plaque, half obscured by the dust of centuries, read, "Project Tempus." "Project Tempus," I muttered. Was this related to the timepiece conspiracy? Holmes nodded grimly. Indeed, what we have failed to realize is that Clara Westfield was not alone in her fight against the forces manipulating time. This underground network of tunnels, much like her own machinery, was designed to control time itself. We stepped into the darkened chamber, where the air was thick with the scent of dust and age. The room was a labyrinth of gears and levers, their function long forgotten. In the centre stood an enormous clock, its hands frozen in place, and beneath it lay a set of blueprints, plans for the clockwork of Westminster itself. "This is where it all started," Holmes said quietly. "Long before the whisper conduit, a secretive group of clockmakers and politicians gathered here to design the perfect clock. A clock that could alter the very passage of time, or at the very least make it seem as though they could." I glanced at the blueprints. The diagrams were filled with intricate symbols, with numbers and equations that seemed almost too advanced for their time. "You mean they were planning on manipulating not just time, but perception?" Holmes's expression hardened. "Precisely. They weren't merely interested in predicting events, Watson. They wanted to control them, Every gear, every tick of the clock was part of a grand design to bend the flow of time to their will. And Clara's cog, the one we recovered from the wreckage, was the final piece. It can reset the clock, so to speak, but only if the conditions are right. I shivered at the implications. The idea that time itself could be manipulated in such a way was beyond comprehension. But Holmes was right. The clock beneath Westminster wasn't merely an artifact. It was a tool, one with the potential to reshape the very fabric of the world. "We need to find out who is still involved in this," I said, my voice steady despite the weight of the discovery. If these conspirators are still at large, they could do untold damage. Holmes nodded, turning toward the shadowed corner of the room where a set of dark figures stood, watching us with cold eyes. "That's precisely what we intend to do, Watson. We have a long road ahead of us, but tonight we've taken the first step toward uncovering the truth." Chapter 17. A Time to Strike. The next morning, as dawn began to break over the foggy skyline of London, Holmes and I stood before the familiar entrance of Scotland Yard. Inspector Lestrade was waiting for us, his brow furrowed in concern. "Holmes? Watson?" he greeted us with his usual gruff tone. "I've got news. There's been another incident at the docks. A shipment of clocks, unmarked but highly sophisticated, was discovered hidden in a warehouse." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "I see. And the connection?" Lestrade hesitated, glancing around as though ensuring no one was listening. "The clocks. They matched the designs we found beneath Westminster. Same mechanisms, same patterns. We're dealing with a larger network than we thought." Holmes nodded, his mind clearly already racing. "I'll need a list of the dock workers who handled the shipment. Watson, let's gather our things. We have work to do." We followed Lestrade to the warehouse, a decrepit building that stood like a forgotten relic of the industrial age. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a dimly lit interior. At the far end, rows upon rows of clockwork mechanisms sat like lifeless sentinels, their polished brass gears glistening faintly in the dull light. "This is it," Holmes murmured, walking toward the crates. He tapped a small brass mechanism, and it immediately clicked open, revealing more intricate designs, each one a piece of the puzzle that had plagued us for weeks. "Why are these clocks here?" I asked, bewildered. "What is their purpose?" Holmes paused, carefully examining the mechanisms. "They are not just timepieces, Watson. These are prototypes, designs for a far more ambitious project. A clock that could synchronize with the Westminster clock and allow its user to control time's flow. If they succeed in completing this project, no one would be able to predict their actions, let alone stop them." Lestrade took a deep breath. "So, this is it. The last stage of the conspiracy." Holmes turned, his gaze resolute. "It's not over yet, Inspector. We've only just begun to understand the full scope of their plan. But we're close. Very close." Chapter 18. The final hour. The final confrontation took place in the depths of London's most notorious district, the East End. Holmes had pieced together a pattern from the clues we had uncovered over the past few weeks, and it all pointed to an old clock tower that had been decommissioned years ago. The tower, abandoned and left to crumble in the shadow of the bustling city, now served as the perfect hideout for the mastermind behind the conspiracy. As Holmes and I approached the tower under the cover of night, the eerie sound of ticking clocks filled the air, a constant reminder that time was running out. "Do you hear it, Watson?" Holmes murmured, his voice sharp. "The ticking of the clock. It never stops, never ceases. But tonight we will stop it." We reached the base of the tower, where a rickety staircase spiraled up into the darkness. Holmes's eyes flashed with determination as he led the way, his mind clearly racing with the calculations needed to end this once and for all. the top of the tower, we found the clock mechanism, an enormous, intricate system of gears and cogs that filled the entire room, and there, standing beside the controls, was Jonas Wolfe, his eyes burning with fanaticism. "You're too late, Holmes," Wolfe sneered. "This time you won't be able to stop the clock." Holmes stepped forward, his voice steady. "It's never too late, Wolfe. You can't control time. You can't bend it to your will. Not without consequences." Wolfe laughed maniacally, his fingers hovering over the master switch. "Time is already broken, Holmes. All I have to do is pull this lever, and the world will be mine." Before he could make his move, Holmes lunged forward, knocking Wolfe's hand away from the switch. A struggle ensued, but with a quick twist of his wrist, Holmes disarmed the madman, sending him tumbling to the floor. The clock tower began to shake, its gears grinding in protest, but it was too late. Holmes had already severed the main power line, and the clock's hands slowly began to tick back to a stop. As the dust settled, we stood in the stillness, the ticking finally silenced. Wolfe was hauled away by Lestrade's men, his plans thwarted. Holmes turned to me, his face calm but resolute. "We've stopped them, Watson. But remember, the whispers of time will always return. It's only a matter of when." I nodded, knowing full well that no matter how many times we stopped the clock, the battle against those who sought to control time would never truly end. Chapter 19. The Clockmaker's Legacy. The morning after our confrontation in the clock tower, Baker Street felt eerily quiet. The stillness was almost suffocating, as if time itself had momentarily stopped in the wake of our victory. Holmes, ever the one to be consumed by his thoughts, had retreated to his chair, a violin resting beside him. Yet his fingers tapped incessantly on the armrest, betraying the depth of his contemplation. "Holmes, what troubles you?" I asked, observing his restless behaviour. Holmes looked up, his piercing gaze meeting mine. "Watson, there is something we overlooked in this case, something that has been hiding in plain sight all along." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The whispering clock, Watson. It was never about the physical clocks, the devices or the plans," Holmes said, his voice low with realization. "It was about something much more profound. The message encoded in the ticking, the rhythm of time itself." I leaned forward, intrigued. "You've lost me, Holmes. How can time itself be the message?" Holmes rose from his chair, pacing around the room. "Consider this. The whispering clock was not just a machine. It was a symbol, a legacy of clockmakers from centuries past, those who believed they could control time. And Wolfe, the madman we confronted, wasn't the first to pursue this dream. This obsession runs deeper, Watson. It's part of a larger tradition, one that stretches all the way back to the earliest days of clockmaking." I stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. "So, you're suggesting this wasn't just a scheme by a few radicals, but something much older?" Holmes nodded. "Precisely. The clockwork mechanisms used in Westminster and those we found beneath the tower were all part of a grander plan. A plan designed to preserve the legacy of the very first clockmakers who believed time was a force to be mastered. Wolfe was simply the latest in a long line of misguided souls trying to harness that power." I frowned. "But what of the device we recovered from Clara Westfield? It was clearly a key to unlocking something larger." "Yes, and that's the part we must now examine more closely," Holmes replied. "That cog was not just a component, it was a map, Watson. A map that leads to the true heart of the clockmaker's legacy." Chapter 20. The Hidden Cipher. Later that afternoon, Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, where we began a careful study of the cog we had recovered from Clara Westfield. Holmes spread out a large map of London, covering it with various notes and symbols. The cog, small and deceptively simple, sat in the centre of the table. I watched Holmes as he examined the piece with his usual intensity. "Do you see it, Watson?" he asked, his voice suddenly filled with excitement. I leaned over, inspecting the cog more closely. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a gear, polished and worn with age, but upon closer inspection I saw faint engravings along its edge, symbols that seemed to shift in the light, almost as though they were moving. "Good God!" I murmured, recognizing the pattern. "It's a cipher, isn't it?" Holmes nodded. "Exactly. A cipher designed to lead us to the next phase of the clockmaker's legacy. These symbols, when properly aligned with the mechanisms in Westminster, reveal a hidden passage, a route that leads to something far more dangerous than we've yet imagined." I stared at him in disbelief. "You mean to say there's another layer to this conspiracy? That this cog is more than just a key to a bomb?" Holmes's face grew grave. "Yes, Watson. This is a map to the heart of the clockmaker's secret. If we follow it, we may uncover a truth that, once revealed, could change everything we know about time and our very place within it." We worked through the night, deciphering the symbols on the cog and comparing them to the old maps of London. By the early hours of the morning, we had a clearer understanding of where the passage led. It was hidden beneath an old church in the heart of the city, an abandoned site long thought to be nothing more than a relic of the past. As dawn broke, Holmes turned to me, his expression resolute. "Watson, we must leave at once. There is no time to waste." Chapter 21. Beneath the Church. By midday, we arrived at the church, the St. Margaret's Church in Westminster, a place that had long been abandoned, its bell tower silent and its once grand pews left to rot. The site was nearly forgotten by the public, a quiet ruin amidst the bustling city. Yet Holmes had deduced that this was where our search for the clockmaker's secret would lead. We approached the church cautiously, the air thick with the scent of decaying stone and ivy. Holmes knelt before the old wooden door, examining the lock with practised hands. A faint click echoed in the silence as he unlocked it and gently pushed the door open. Inside, the church was a cavern of shadows, the light filtering in through cracked stained glass windows. The pews were long gone, replaced by piles of rubble and dust. In the centre of the room stood an altar, covered in strange cryptic carvings. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the room. "There it is, Watson," he said quietly, pointing to the altar. At its base, half concealed beneath a stone slab, was a set of intricate gears and cogs, larger than any we had seen before. They appeared to be connected to the structure of the church itself. I stepped forward, my heart racing. "What are these, Holmes?" Holmes knelt beside the gears, carefully brushing away the dust. "These are the final pieces of the clockmaker's design. This altar, like the clock tower, was part of their ultimate plan. The gears were meant to control more than just time. They were meant to control the very flow of events." I watched in stunned silence as Holmes worked quickly, aligning the pieces with the cog we had recovered from Clara Westfield. There was a soft click, and suddenly the floor beneath us began to tremble. The stone slab shifted, revealing a dark, narrow staircase that descended deep into the earth. Holmes looked at me, his expression grim. "This is it, Watson. We've uncovered the heart of the secret, but what we find below may be far more dangerous than we could have imagined." Without hesitation, Holmes led the way down the stairs. The air grew colder as we descended, the darkness swallowing us whole. Finally, we reached the bottom, a cavernous chamber that stretched beyond the reach of our lanterns. In the centre of the room stood a large pulsating mechanism, an enormous clock, unlike any we had seen before. Its hands moved not in hours or minutes, but in a pattern that seemed to defy logic itself. "This is the heart of the conspiracy," Holmes whispered. "The ultimate clock, the one that can truly control time." I stepped forward, my breath catching in my throat. "Holmes, what do we do now?" Holmes turned to me, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "Now, Watson, we destroy it, before it destroys us all." Chapter 22. The Clock's Heart. The chamber beneath St. Margaret's Church was unlike anything I had ever seen. The enormous clock before us pulsed with a rhythmic beat, its gears whirring and ticking in a symphony that seemed to echo throughout the vast underground space. It was as though time itself had become tangible, solidified into this monstrous machine. The very air around us hummed with an unsettling energy. Holmes stepped closer to the clock, his eyes narrowing with a mix of awe and determination. "And this is it, Watson. This is the culmination of the clockmaker's legacy. A clock designed not just to measure time, but to control it." I took a hesitant step forward, feeling a chill creep over my skin as the hands of the clock ticked erratically. The mechanism seemed alive, the gears turning with a mind of their own. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. I had never encountered anything like it before, and the realization hit me with a sudden terrifying clarity. This was not just a timepiece. It was a weapon, a tool of unimaginable power. "What do you intend to do with it, Holmes?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Holmes didn't answer immediately. He was too focused on the intricate patterns of the gears, his fingers tracing the edges of the massive structure. "We have two options, Watson," he said at last, his voice steady but tinged with an underlying urgency. "We can destroy it, render it useless, or we can try to understand it and harness its power before those who would misuse it get their hands on it." I glanced around the chamber. There were no windows, no exit save the narrow stairway from which we had descended. It was as if this place existed beyond time itself, cut off from the world above. But it would not remain hidden forever. "What, do you mean harness its power?" I asked, my unease growing. "We cannot allow this machine to fall into the wrong hands. If anyone learns how to control it—" Holmes raised a hand, cutting me off. "I understand your concern, Watson. Believe me, I do. But think of the possibilities. If we could learn how to control this clock, we could change the course of history. We could prevent disasters, save lives, perhaps even rewrite the mistakes of the past." I shook my head, my heart racing at the thought of such power falling into the wrong hands. "And who would control it, Holmes? You? Me? What makes you think we would be any different from the people who have tried to manipulate time for their own gain?" Holmes paused, his expression sombre. "You're right, Watson. We cannot allow anyone to control it, not without understanding the full extent of its implications. The stakes are too high. We must destroy it." It was a decision made with a heavy heart, but I knew it was the only course of action. As Holmes carefully began to disengage the gears, I heard a faint, almost imperceptible noise, like the distant ticking of another clock. I froze. "Holmes, listen!" Holmes's eyes widened, and he immediately stood upright, his gaze darting around the cavern. "It's too late. Someone else is here." Chapter 23. The Intruders. Before we could react, the chamber's entrance was flooded with light, and the sound of footsteps echoed off the stone walls. Figures cloaked in dark robes emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden by masks. There were at least 5 of them, and they moved with a purpose, surrounding us in an instant. I instinctively reached for my revolver, but Holmes stopped me with a swift motion. "No, Watson, let me handle this." The leader of the group stepped forward, his mask adorned with strange symbols that seemed to glow in the dim light. His voice was low, menacing. "You should not have come here, Holmes." "Who are you?" Holmes demanded, his voice steady despite the danger. "What is this place, and what do you want with the clock?" The masked figure chuckled darkly. "We are the Keepers, the guardians of time's true essence. And this clock is ours to protect, ours to wield. You have no right to interfere." I felt a surge of anger. "Protect? You intend to use it, don't you? To control time and alter the course of history for your own gain?" The Keeper's laugh echoed off the walls. "You misunderstand, Dr. Watson. Time is not ours to control. We are its servants, not its masters. But the clock, this machine, is an ancient artifact, one that must be safeguarded at all costs. It is the key to ensuring that time continues to flow as it should." I turned to Holmes, my confusion mounting. "But you said the clock was a weapon." Holmes raised a hand, silencing me. "Yes, Watson, and while the Keepers may claim to protect it, their true purpose is to use it. They are no different from those we've already faced." The Keeper stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "We will not allow you to destroy what we have worked so hard to protect. Step aside, Holmes, or we will be forced to stop you." For a long moment the room was still. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my grip tightening on the revolver. I knew that this confrontation was inevitable. What remained uncertain was whether we would emerge from this alive. Holmes slowly reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small device. It looked like an old-fashioned detonator, the kind used to trigger explosives, but the faint glow from its surface suggested that it was something far more advanced. The Keeper's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" "It's a fail-safe," Holmes said quietly, "a way to ensure that this machine cannot be used by anyone." Before the Keeper could react, Holmes pressed the button, and a deep rumbling filled the chamber. The ground beneath our feet shook as the massive clock began to shudder violently, its gears spinning out of control. "No!" the Keeper shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "You've doomed us all!" The clock's hands moved wildly, faster and faster, until they became a blur of motion. The pulsing energy in the room intensified, the very air vibrating with a force I could barely comprehend. The Keepers tried to move toward the machine, but the chaos had already begun. Holmes grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the staircase. "We need to get out of here, Watson, quickly!" As we turned to flee, I glanced over my shoulder. The Keepers were struggling to regain control of the machine, but it was clear that it was already too late. The clock had become a force of nature, its power out of control. Chapter 24. The Final Tick. We ran up the narrow staircase, the sound of the rumbling clock growing louder with each step. Behind us, the chamber seemed to be coming apart. Stone walls cracked and shattered as the clock's energy surged uncontrollably. The Keeper's voices echoed in the distance, but there was no time to look back. Holmes's pace never faltered, and I struggled to keep up. My mind raced with questions, but the answers eluded me. What had we unleashed? Was it too late to stop the clock? And what would become of the Keepers now that their precious machine had spiraled beyond their control? We reached the top of the stairs and burst out into the church, the daylight momentarily blinding us. We didn't stop to look back, but hurried out into the streets of London, making our way as far from the church as possible. As we walked, I looked at Holmes, my mind still spinning. What now, Holmes? Holmes's expression was unreadable. Now, Watson, we wait. We wait to see if time heals itself, if we've truly destroyed the heart of the conspiracy, or if it will return to haunt us once more. And with that, we disappeared into the bustling city, uncertain of what the future would hold, but knowing that, for the moment, the battle for time itself had come to an end. Chapter 25. A New Threat. The days that followed our escape from St. Margaret's Church were marked by an uneasy silence. The City of London, as always, seemed to move at its own pace, unaware of the cataclysm we had narrowly averted. Holmes and I kept to ourselves, wary of the unknown repercussions of what we had left behind beneath the church. I couldn't help but feel that the storm wasn't over, that the time we had bought was fleeting. Holmes, however, remained unusually composed. On the morning of the 5th day since our escape, a letter arrived for Holmes. It was addressed in a delicate cursive hand, but the words were sharply cut. An unmistakable message from someone who knew both the stakes and the danger we had narrowly avoided. Holmes opened the envelope, his expression unreadable as he read its contents aloud. Sherlock Holmes, you have made a grave mistake. The clock cannot be destroyed. It is merely waiting for the right hands to unlock its true potential. Do not think that you can run from this. Time will find you. It always does. A friend. Holmes's face darkened as he read the letter a second time. His fingers, usually so steady, trembled for a brief moment. This is bad, Watson. Very bad. I raised an eyebrow. What does it mean? Who would send such a cryptic message? Holmes looked up from the letter, his eyes hard. This friend is no ally, Watson. They are someone with knowledge of the clock, and more importantly, someone who intends to use it to their advantage. But the clock is destroyed, Holmes. Surely nothing can come of it now. That's what we thought, Holmes replied grimly. But it seems we were mistaken. The clock's power doesn't reside just in its physical components. It's embedded in the very flow of time itself. A dangerous knowledge, one that can't be erased, no matter how much we wish it to be so. I leaned forward. So, what do we do now? Holmes folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. We find this friend, Watson, and we ensure that they can never get their hands on what remains of the clock's secret. Time is no longer on our side. Chapter 26. Into the Shadows. As Holmes and I prepared to leave Baker Street to investigate the mysterious letter, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every passerby seemed to glance at us with intent, their gazes lingering just a moment too long. Even the air itself felt thick, as though the city had become a stage for a play where every character was waiting for their cue to make their move. We headed to the safe house, where we had kept some of our most dangerous clues, the remnants of the cogs, the maps, and the cryptic writings left behind by Wolfe and the keepers. Holmes had already deduced that the friend would be someone connected to the underground networks of London, those who lived in the shadows, where the law couldn't reach. It was within these murky depths that we would find the answers. We entered a narrow alley off Fleet Street, where the cobblestones were slick with the remnants of a recent rainstorm. Holmes led the way, his steps sure and purposeful. I followed closely, noting the way his eyes darted from shadow to shadow, ever watchful. "Holmes, how do you know where we're headed?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Holmes didn't answer right away. Instead, he paused at a seemingly insignificant door tucked between two brick walls. A sign above the door read, "The Rusty Gear," a name that meant nothing to me but seemed to carry weight in Holmes's world. "We're about to meet someone who knows far more than they let on," Holmes said quietly, his hand resting on the door handle. "This place is a hub for those who deal in timepieces, machinery, anything that operates outside of the accepted boundaries of society." He knocked thrice in quick succession, the pattern precise. I raised an eyebrow at the unusual code, but before I could ask about it, the door creaked open. A tall man with sharp features and an air of quiet menace stood in the doorway. His eyes flickered over us before settling on Holmes. "You're late," the man said gruffly. Holmes didn't flinch. "Better late than never, Dobson. Is it ready?" The man Dobson nodded once, stepping aside to allow us to enter. "It's as ready as it's going to get, but I don't trust your friend. If he's here for the wrong reasons, there'll be hell to pay." Holmes gave him a tight smile. "We're here for the right reasons, Dobson. We need to understand what we're up against." We followed Dobson into a dimly lit room where an array of strange devices were strewn about. Wires, gears, and metal components, all seemingly part of some larger, incomprehensible machine. At the centre of the room, however, was a large map of London, dotted with various red X's marking points of interest. "Here," Dobson said, pointing to the map, "your so-called friend has been moving around these locations as though they're trying to piece together something. I can't tell you what, but I can tell you that it's bad news for anyone who stands in their way." Holmes leaned over the map, studying it intently. "This map, it's showing the same locations we found in the cipher. They're trying to rebuild something. But what?" I stepped closer to get a better look. "It looks like the old clock tower, but some of these places, they don't exist anymore." "Exactly," Holmes murmured, his eyes narrowing. "They're trying to resurrect the clock's legacy. This is bigger than we realized. This friend isn't just trying to use the machine for their own gain. They're attempting to bring back something far worse." Suddenly, a noise echoed from the shadows, a metallic scraping sound, followed by the hiss of something large moving in the darkness. I instinctively reached for my weapon, but Holmes stopped me. "It's not time for that yet, Watson," he whispered. "We need to move quickly, before we're trapped here with whatever they're planning." Chapter 27. The Race Against Time. Holmes and I turned to leave, but as we approached the door, a sudden rush of footsteps echoed down the alleyway. I could hear the sound of voices, low and urgent. Holmes's eyes darted to the back of the room, where a narrow door led to the street beyond. "Go," Holmes ordered. "We can't let them catch us here. If we're seen leaving, they'll know we're on to them." I nodded, understanding immediately. We had no choice but to make a quick escape. The last thing we needed was to alert our pursuers to our location. We ducked through the back door, which opened onto a dark alley. Holmes led the way, his footsteps swift and silent. I followed closely, glancing over my shoulder to ensure we weren't being followed. As we turned a corner, a shadowy figure stepped out from an alley, blocking our path. I stopped short, my hand instinctively reaching for my revolver. "Holmes," the figure said, their voice low and familiar. "I knew you'd come." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "We meet again, Westfield?" Clara Westfield stepped into the dim light, her expression inscrutable. "You didn't think you could stop the clock, did you? It's not over. It's only just begun." Chapter 28. A Game of Shadows. Clara Westfield's presence was as unsettling as ever. Standing in the alley before us, she exuded the calm confidence of someone who had long been entrenched in the shadows. Holmes, ever the observer, didn't flinch at her appearance, though I could see the sharpness in his eyes. He hadn't expected this meeting. "Clara," Holmes said, his voice steady, "what are you doing here? What do you know about this friend? Westfield's lips curled into a sly smile. "Oh, Holmes, always so direct. I'd think by now you'd know better than to ask a question you already know the answer to." I felt a chill run down my spine at her words. Westfield was no ordinary adversary. She was well versed in the art of deception, a master of playing her cards close to her chest. But this was different. There was something in her eyes, something dangerous, that made me wonder if we had underestimated her. "I'm not here to play games," Holmes said, his voice sharpening. "Tell us everything you know, Clara. Time is running out." Her smile faltered. For the briefest moment, a flash of something I couldn't quite place crossing her face. Then, as if she had regained control of her emotions, she stepped closer. "You think you've stopped it, don't you? The clock. You think you've destroyed its power, that you've silenced its whispers for good? But you're wrong. What do you mean?" I asked, unable to keep the edge of disbelief from my voice. Westfield's eyes gleamed. "The clock is not a mere device, Watson. It's a conduit, a bridge between realities. It doesn't just measure time, it alters it. You've merely scratched the surface." Holmes stepped forward, his expression dark. "And what does that mean for us? What's the true cost of the clock's power?" Westfield paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle between us. "The clock, in its full capacity, can reverse the very flow of time. It can change past mistakes, erase tragedies, and grant second chances, but only to those who can unlock its true potential." I felt my stomach churn at her words. "And you want to use it, don't you?" Westfield's gaze never wavered. "Not just me, Holmes. There are others. Those who know what the clock can do and who will stop at nothing to control it. You can't stop them. They will stop you first." Holmes's jaw clenched, but he said nothing for a moment. Instead, he turned to me, his eyes calculating. "We need to get to the source of this power, Watson. We need to find out who else is involved before it's too late." Westfield's smile returned, but it was laced with something cold. "Be careful, Sherlock. You're playing a dangerous game, and in this game there are no winners, only those who survive." Before I could react, she turned and disappeared into the darkness of the alley, leaving us with nothing but her ominous warning hanging in the air. Chapter 29. The Hunt Begins. We spent the next few hours in silence, processing everything Westfield had said. Holmes, as always, seemed deep in thought, his mind whirring through the puzzle pieces at an almost dizzying speed. But I couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation bearing down on us, the clock, the whispers, and now this unknown enemy. Everything seemed to be converging towards something far worse than we could imagine. "Holmes," I said, breaking the silence, "if what Westfield said is true, if the clock really can alter time, then we are dealing with a power far beyond anything we've faced before." Holmes nodded without looking up. "Yes, Watson, it's a terrifying thought, but we can't allow anyone to control it. If this friend and the others like them gain access to the clock's true power, they could reshape reality itself. We cannot let that happen." "But where do we begin?" I asked. "How do we stop something that has the ability to rewrite time?" Holmes turned his gaze toward me, his eyes sharp and focused. "We begin by finding the others. Westfield may have provided a clue, but it is still unclear who we are truly up against. I have a theory, but it will require us to dig deeper into the city's underworld, the places where power is brokered in shadows, away from prying eyes." I frowned. "You think the clock's influence has reached that far?" Holmes's lips twitched into a small smile. "I'm afraid the answer is more complicated than that, Watson. The clock's power doesn't just attract the greedy and the ambitious. It also draws in those who wish to undo their past mistakes, the ones who would go to any lengths to change what they regret. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the task ahead. So, we're hunting ghosts, people who think they can rewrite their lives and who will stop at nothing to control the clock. Exactly, Holmes said, his voice steady. And I believe one of them is closer than we think. Chapter 30. The Dark Figure. Holmes led me through the narrow, winding streets of the East End. The fog had rolled in, thick and oppressive, shrouding the city in an eerie haze. The gaslights cast long, distorted shadows, and the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the alleyways. It was as though the entire city had fallen under a spell, trapped in some dark moment in time. We arrived at a small, nondescript building tucked between two larger structures. The windows were dark, and the door was barely visible in the gloom. Holmes knocked in a rapid sequence, 3 short, deliberate taps, followed by 2 longer knocks. The door creaked open, revealing a figure cloaked in black. The man's face was obscured by the shadows, but I could tell he was tall and thin, his movements deliberate. "Holmes," the man said, his voice a low rasp. "I've been expecting you." Holmes stepped inside without hesitation. I followed, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. The room was dimly lit, filled with books and strange artifacts, all of them bearing some connection to timepieces and clocks. "You've been expecting me?" Holmes asked, raising an eyebrow. "And who might you be?" The man stepped forward, revealing his face. His features were sharp, his eyes cold. "My name is Edward Blackwood. I am a collector of rare artifacts, and I believe you're here for something very specific." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "You know why we're here?" Blackwood smiled, but there was something predatory in his expression. "I do. You want the clock, and I know exactly where it is." Chapter 31. The Clock's Secret. Edward Blackwood's words hung in the air like a threat. Holmes and I exchanged a glance, neither of us willing to break the silence first. Blackwood's face remained unreadable, but his posture suggested that he held more than just knowledge. He held power. "You know where the clock is?" Holmes asked, his voice cool and measured. Blackwood gave a slight nod. "I do, but it's not something you can simply take. The clock's location is not just hidden, it's protected. It requires someone with knowledge of its power to access it." I felt a sudden jolt of unease. "And you're willing to share this information with us?" Blackwood's smile was as cold as ice. "Oh, I'm not giving it away, Holmes. You'll need to prove yourselves first." Holmes studied Blackwood with keen eyes. "Prove ourselves? How?" The collector's gaze flickered to a shelf behind him, filled with what appeared to be ancient timepieces, their brass faces gleaming in the dim light. He reached out and picked up a small, ornate clock, holding it up so that its intricate design caught the faint glow of the gas lamps. "This," Blackwood said, "is not a mere clock. It's a test." I frowned, not understanding. "A test of what?" Blackwood's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. "A test of your ability to understand the true nature of the clock. You see, Holmes, the clock you're looking for is not just a device for measuring time. It's a key to an ancient order, one that controls the flow of time itself. But only those who can master its intricacies can wield its power." Holmes was silent for a moment, his mind clearly racing. "And you think we're capable of passing your test?" Blackwood chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Oh, I know you are. You have come this far, after all. But the true challenge lies in knowing what you're willing to sacrifice to gain control of such power." I felt a shiver run down my spine. What kind of sacrifice? Blackwood's smile widened, and his eyes darkened. That, Watson, is the true nature of the clock. It demands a price that many are unwilling to pay. But those who are willing to make the sacrifice will find themselves in possession of unimaginable power. Holmes stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Blackwood's face. "What do you want from us, Blackwood?" Blackwood's expression grew serious. "The clock isn't just hidden in some obscure location. It's been sealed away for a reason. To unlock it, you must first understand its power, and to understand its power, you must face the trials I have set before you." I glanced at Holmes, unsure of what to make of Blackwood's words. This was a dangerous game, one that seemed to promise nothing but trouble. But Holmes, ever the strategist, didn't hesitate. "Very well," Holmes said, his voice unwavering. "We will accept your test. But know this, we will not allow anyone to wield the clock's power. If that means destroying it once and for all, then so be it." Blackwood's smile faded slightly, but he didn't retreat. "We shall see, Holmes, we shall see." Chapter 32. The First Trial. The room Blackwood led us into was unlike anything I had seen before. It was a small dark chamber, filled with symbols and strange markings. On one wall, a large clock stood, its hands frozen at midnight, while on the opposite wall, a giant wheel of gears and mechanisms seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. "This," Blackwood said, his voice echoing in the chamber, "is the first trial. You must solve the puzzle before you can proceed. The clock, in its full form, requires those who seek it to understand the nature of time, and time is not always linear." Holmes stepped forward, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "A puzzle, I see. And what are the stakes?" Blackwood's expression became serious. "The stakes are simple, Holmes. If you fail, you will be trapped here, forever lost in time. If you succeed, you will gain access to the next stage of the journey." I turned to Holmes, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "And how do we solve this puzzle?" Holmes didn't respond immediately. He was too busy studying the intricate patterns on the wall. As he examined the markings, I could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He was piecing something together, a connection that eluded me. "There's a pattern," Holmes muttered to himself. "A sequence. It's not random. Everything here has been designed to test our understanding of time. We're looking for a key, Watson. A key that will unlock the next step." I watched as Holmes approached the giant clock on the wall, his fingers brushing against the frozen hands. His brow furrowed as he traced the symbols around the clock's face. The time here isn't just a symbol. It's a map. I looked at the clock, trying to make sense of the strange combination of numbers and shapes. Then it hit me. There was a riddle hidden in plain sight. The numbers on the clock were not just a sequence. They were coordinates, a location embedded in time itself. "Holmes, look," I said, pointing at the numbers. "They correspond to the places we've already visited. The clock tower, the church, and now this chamber." Holmes nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "Exactly, Watson. We're not just solving a puzzle, we're retracing our steps. The clock's power is linked to these locations. By following the pattern, we can unlock the next part of the mystery." With a final twist of his wrist, Holmes adjusted the hands of the clock, aligning them with the coordinates we had deciphered. A low rumble filled the room, and the gears on the opposite wall began to turn, the grinding sound sending shivers through me. For a moment, everything was still, and then the wall shifted, the hidden door slid open, revealing a dark passage beyond. Blackwood's voice echoed in the chamber, tinged with satisfaction. "Well done, Holmes, but this is only the beginning. If you wish to continue, you must keep your wits about you. The next trial will be even more difficult." Holmes turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Let's proceed, Watson. We can't stop now." I nodded, feeling the weight of the journey ahead. The clock had already started its countdown. There was no turning back. Chapter 33. The second trial. The passage we entered was narrow and claustrophobic, the air thick with the scent of old wood and dust. As we made our way deeper into the darkness, I could hear the distant sound of ticking, like a clock, but faint and irregular, as though it were coming from all directions at once. Holmes moved forward with his usual confidence, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. I stayed close behind, my heart pounding in my chest. This was no ordinary adventure. Each step brought us closer to something far greater than we could comprehend. We arrived at a small chamber, its walls covered in ancient symbols and strange markings. In the centre of the room was a pedestal, atop which rested a second clock, this one much older and more intricate than the last. "This is the second trial," Holmes said, his voice calm but with an edge of anticipation. "To proceed, we must understand the true nature of this clock. It is not merely a machine, it is a test of willpower." I stepped closer to the pedestal, my eyes narrowing at the clock. Unlike the first one, this clock had no numbers. Its face was blank, save for an engraving in the centre. "The hands that turn must not be swayed by fear." Holmes studied the engraving carefully. "This is a test of resolve, Watson. The clock is asking us to control our fear. It's a test of our willingness to face the unknown without hesitation." I felt a cold sweat on my brow. The air around us seemed to grow heavier, as though something unseen was pushing against us. "And how do we pass this trial?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed his hand on the clock's face, and the moment he did, the ticking grew louder, closer. I looked around, but there was no sign of any threat. The sound seemed to emanate from the clock itself, growing faster and faster. Holmes's face was hard, his eyes fixed on the clock. "We must endure, Watson. We cannot be afraid. The clock is testing our ability to face the unknown without turning back." The ticking grew louder still, deafening in its intensity. I could feel the panic rising within me, the urge to flee becoming almost unbearable. But Holmes stood firm, his hand unwavering on the clock. Then, with a sudden jolt, the ticking stopped. Holmes slowly lifted his hand, and the clock's face flickered back into life, its hands now moving forward. The room shifted, and the walls seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. The second trial was over. Chapter 34. The Shadow's Touch. The room around us seemed to pulse with a strange energy, the walls trembling slightly, as if responding to some unseen force. I watched as Holmes stood before the newly revealed doorway, his eyes scanning the dark passage beyond. The air felt colder now, and the smell of damp stone filled my nostrils. Holmes was deep in thought, his brow furrowed as he considered what lay ahead. I could see the intensity in his eyes. This was no ordinary case anymore. The stakes had escalated, and we were now on the precipice of something much larger than we had anticipated. "Holmes," I asked cautiously, "what is this place? What lies beyond that door?" Holmes turned to me, his expression grim. "It's difficult to say, Watson, but I believe we are now entering the heart of the mystery. The clock's trials are not merely tests of skill, but of our very souls. We are not just solving a puzzle anymore. We are facing something far more dangerous, something that has been hidden for centuries." I shivered, the weight of his words pressing down on me. "You mean to say that the clock itself is more than just an artifact?" Holmes nodded. Exactly. It's a key. A key that unlocks something deeper, something far more sinister. The whispers we've been hearing, they're not just echoes of the past. They are messages from something beyond our comprehension, a force that seeks to control time itself. I felt my heart race as the full gravity of our situation began to sink in. And what do we do now? How do we stop it? Holmes didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped toward the door, his hand brushing against the cold stone. We move forward, Watson. The only way to stop this is to face it head-on. But we must be prepared. Whatever we encounter on the other side will test us like never before. With a deep breath, Holmes pushed the door open. The passage beyond was narrow, the walls lined with strange symbols and unfamiliar markings. The sound of distant ticking filled the air once more, and the temperature seemed to drop with every step we took. As we ventured deeper into the passage, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The darkness seemed to press in on us from all sides, the only light coming from the faint glow of our lantern. Every turn, every corner, felt like it might be our last. Then, as we rounded a sharp bend in the passage, we came upon a strange sight. A figure standing motionless in the shadows. It was a man, tall and gaunt, dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by a hood. Holmes stopped, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice sharp. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate, like some sort of phantom emerging from the dark. His presence was unsettling, a palpable aura of menace surrounding him. Finally, the figure spoke, his voice low and hollow. "You've come far, Holmes, but you cannot stop what is already in motion." I felt a cold chill run down my spine as the figure's words seemed to echo in my mind. "Who are you?" I repeated, my voice shaking slightly. The figure tilted his head, as if amused by my question. "I am the Shadow," he said, his tone dripping with an unsettling calm. "I am the one who controls the clock. I am the one who whispers in the dark, guiding those who seek its power." Holmes stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the figure. The Shadow. I should have known. He paused, his eyes searching the figure's face, though he couldn't see it clearly. "What do you want?" The Shadow smiled, a thin, cruel smile that sent a shiver through me. "What I want is simple. I want control. The clock's power is mine to command, and with it I will rewrite the world. Time itself will bend to my will." I could hardly breathe as the weight of his words sunk in. The clock wasn't just a tool for manipulation. It was a weapon, a way to shape reality itself. And now this Shadow intended to wield it. "Not if I can help it," Holmes said coldly, stepping forward. The Shadow's smile widened. "You think you can stop me, Holmes? You are just a man, a mere mortal, in the face of a force far greater than you can understand." Holmes didn't flinch. "I don't need to understand everything to stop you. I just need to stop you from using the clock. The world doesn't need to be reshaped. It needs to remain as it is." The Shadow tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "You're a fool if you think that's possible. The clock is already in motion. Its influence has already begun to spread. There's no turning back now." Holmes didn't back down, his eyes burning with determination. "There's always a way to stop it, and I'll find it." The Shadow let out a dark laugh, stepping closer. "You can try, Holmes, but time is already on my side, and with the clock in my hands, I will have everything I desire." Couldn't stand it any longer. "Holmes, we need to do something," I said, my voice tight with fear. Holmes didn't respond at first. His gaze remained locked on the Shadow. his mind working quickly, calculating the next move. Then, without warning, Holmes grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the figure. "Move quickly, Watson," he said in a low voice. "We can't let him get any closer to the clock. We need to find a way to disrupt the flow of time before it's too late." I nodded, my pulse quickening. We had to stop the shadow before he could manipulate time itself. As we made our way deeper into the passage, I couldn't help but feel that we were running out of time. The ticking of the clock grew louder, more insistent, and the sense of dread that had been hanging over us seemed to grow stronger with every step. We had to find a way to stop the clock, and we had to do it quickly, before the shadow's grip on time became unbreakable. Chapter 35. The Key to Time. We moved swiftly through the twisting passage, the air growing colder with each step. The darkness seemed to press in on us, wrapping around us like a suffocating shroud. The sound of the clock's ticking reverberated through the stone walls, its rhythm faster now, as if urging us to hurry. Holmes led the way, his steps deliberate and quick, while I followed closely behind, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadow's words haunted me, lingering in my mind like a dark cloud. He claimed to control the clock. He claimed to control time itself. But Holmes wasn't about to let that happen. "We need to get ahead of him," Holmes said in a low voice, his eyes scanning the walls for any sign of danger. "We need to find the clock before the shadow can reach it." I nodded, though a sense of dread gnawed at me. The deeper we went into the passage, the more I began to feel that we were no longer in control of our own fate. The clock had already begun to exert its influence over the space around us, and the walls seemed to shift with an almost sentient awareness. "Holmes," I said, my voice tense, "how do we stop the clock? How do we destroy something that controls time?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, ancient-looking key. The metal gleamed in the dim light, its surface worn with age. "This," Holmes said, his voice calm but resolute, "is the key to the clock. It's the only way to unlock its true power. But to use it, we must first understand what the clock truly is." I frowned, confused. "You mean it's not just a timepiece?" Holmes shook his head. "No, Watson, it's far more than that. The clock is a conduit, a bridge between dimensions, a key that opens the door to the control of time. And if the shadow gets hold of it, he will rewrite the world as he sees fit." I felt a chill run down my spine. The idea of someone controlling time itself was terrifying, but with the key in our possession, perhaps we had a chance to stop him. We reached the end of the passage and found ourselves in a large chamber, its walls covered with strange, shifting patterns. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, atop which rested the clock, the source of all this chaos. Holmes stepped forward, his fingers closing around the key. "This is it, Watson, the moment of truth." With a deep breath, he inserted the key into the clock's mechanism. The room seemed to pulse with energy, the clock's hands moving backward for the first time. It was now or never. Chapter 36. The Final Countdown. As Holmes turned the key in the clock's mechanism, a loud resonating sound filled the chamber, echoing off the stone walls. The ticking, which had been frantic and irregular, stopped entirely, and the room was swallowed by an eerie silence. It was as if time itself had held its breath. Holmes stepped back, his expression focused and intense. "This is it, Watson," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "If I'm right, this key doesn't just unlock the clock's mechanism, it activates the clock's true power. If we fail to understand how it works, we will be trapped in a never-ending loop. I felt the weight of his words settle heavily on me. We had come so far, faced so many trials, but now, at the final moment, the stakes had never been higher. The shadow was close, and if we didn't act decisively, he would seize the clock and its power. Suddenly, the clock's hands began to move again, but this time they spun in reverse, winding backward in time. The walls of the chamber trembled as the room itself seemed to fold, space bending in ways that defied all logic. A soft whisper, almost imperceptible, began to fill the air, rising like a tide, its source impossible to pinpoint. Holmes looked at the clock with growing concern. We need to disrupt the flow of time before it consumes us. But before we could make another move, we heard footsteps approaching, echoing through the passage. The shadow had found us. Too late. A cold voice called out from the darkness. I turned to see the shadow stepping into the chamber, his form emerging from the shadows like a spectre. His eyes glinted with malicious glee. "You thought you could stop me, Holmes. You cannot escape the power of the clock. It's already too late." Holmes stood tall, facing the shadow with unwavering resolve. "Not if I can help it," he said, his voice steady. The shadow laughed darkly, his eyes narrowing. "You don't understand. The clock doesn't just measure time, it controls it. Once I unlock its full potential, I can reshape the world. Time will bow to my will. And you, Holmes, will be powerless to stop me." The air around us thickened with an almost tangible tension, and I could feel the oppressive weight of time itself pressing down on us. The clock's hands were spinning faster now, out of control. I could see the faint outlines of different moments in time flickering around us like windows into other realities. But Holmes wasn't swayed. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his mind working furiously to counter the shadow's move. "You are wrong," Holmes said firmly. "Time is not something to be controlled. It's a force that moves regardless of our desires. If you try to hold it in your grasp, it will slip through your fingers, and you will be consumed by it." The shadow's smirk faltered, and for a brief moment, doubt flashed across his face. Holmes's words seemed to have struck a chord, but the shadow quickly recovered, his anger flaring. "You think you can defeat me with words?" He raised his hand, and I saw the unmistakable gleam of a dark power emanating from him. Holmes stepped forward, grabbing the clock's key and twisting it once more. The room shuddered, and the clock's hands stopped spinning. A piercing, otherworldly sound rang out, followed by a blinding flash of light. For a moment, I thought I had gone blind, and then everything went still. Chapter 37. The Return to Normal. When my vision cleared, I found myself standing in the same chamber, but everything felt different. The clock was silent, its hands motionless, as though time had stopped entirely. The room was no longer pulsing with energy. The eerie presence that had hung in the air was gone. I looked around quickly. The shadow was no longer there. "Holmes?" I called, my voice shaking. Holmes stood beside me, his hand still resting on the now dormant clock. His expression was serious but relieved. "It's over, Watson. We've stopped him." I could hardly believe it. After everything we had gone through, the shadow's twisted plans were finally thwarted. The clock had been silenced, and its power no longer threatened the world. But how? I asked, still processing the rapid sequence of events. "How did you stop him?" Holmes gave me a small, knowing smile. "The key, Watson. The clock was never meant to be a tool for manipulation. It was a test. one that allowed only those with pure intentions to wield its power. The shadow, consumed by his desire for control, could never understand this. The moment he tried to use the clock for his own gain, its power turned on him. I looked at the clock again. Its once glowing face was now cold and lifeless, its mechanism still. But what happens to it now? What do we do with it? Holmes hesitated for a moment before answering. We destroy it. The clock's power is too dangerous to be left in the world. We can't allow it to fall into the wrong hands again. He reached for the clock and began to dismantle it, piece by piece. As he worked, I could see the deep contemplation in his eyes. This was not just the end of a case, it was the end of something far larger. A force that could have rewritten the very fabric of reality. Within minutes, the clock was reduced to a pile of broken gears and shattered glass. Holmes carefully placed the remains in a metal box and sealed it shut. It's finished, Holmes said quietly. The clock's power is gone. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The world was safe once again. The shadow was defeated, and time, precious, uncontrollable time, was no longer at risk of being manipulated. But as we left the chamber, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than we had yet discovered. We had stopped the shadow, but the clock had always been more than just a timepiece. What other secrets did it hold? Holmes, as always, seemed to read my thoughts. "You're wondering if this is really over, Watson," he said, his voice thoughtful. "The answer is yes, for now. But the clock was only one part of something much greater. We'll never know the full extent of what it was capable of. But for today, we've won. I couldn't argue with that." Chapter 38. The Aftermath. The case of the whispering clock had come to its dramatic conclusion, but I couldn't help but reflect on the strange journey that had led us here. Holmes and I sat in our sitting room at Baker Street, the fire crackling softly as the evening light faded. "Holmes," I began, my voice thoughtful, "what do you think was the true purpose of the clock? Was it really just a tool for time manipulation, or was there something more to it?" Holmes took a long, contemplative puff from his pipe. "It's difficult to say, Watson. The clock may have been more than just a device for controlling time. It could have been an artifact left behind by an ancient order, an order that understood time's true power. We may never know for sure." I nodded, lost in thought. "And the shadow? Do you think he was truly just a pawn in this game?" Holmes shrugged slightly. "Perhaps. The shadow seemed to have a personal agenda, but I suspect he was also part of a larger, more dangerous scheme. Whether he was acting alone or part of something bigger, we may never know." A silence fell between us as we both considered the case. We had stopped the immediate threat, but I had the distinct sense that something more was lurking just beyond the horizon. The clock had been destroyed, but the mysteries of time, of what might lie beyond its grasp, remained unanswered. But for now, the world was safe. Holmes leaned back in his chair, a rare look of satisfaction on his face. "It's over, Watson, for now." I smiled, relieved. "Until the next case, Holmes. Until the next one." And with that, I knew that whatever mysteries awaited us in the future, we would face them together, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, partners in solving the unsolvable.